breaking news from the Bank of Canada this hour. The bank has decided to keep its interest rate steady at 5%. Joining me now is David Macdonald, senior economist at the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives. David, let's start with your reaction. Any surprise?
Not really a surprise. We got the latest GDP numbers on Friday. They were very weak. We basically had zero GDP growth since February. January was a positive month, and every month since that, all the way through to the preliminary estimates in July, have been zero growth. And so in particular, in the areas where you would expect an impact of interest rates on GDP growth, we are seeing that impact. So big declines in residential construction and renovation, and also starting to see some declines in household spending in areas where you'd expect them, where people buy things with debt, motor vehicles, for instance, household durables, as well as some outdoor equipment.
Do you think, David, that we are now done with rate hikes? Is this it?
Well, I think what we need to do now is watch to see what happens on the inflation front. So this is really what the bank is looking at. I mean, this is their mandate, is to keep inflation between 1% and 3%. The last two data points were just around 3%, one below, one above. And so it's really over the course of the fall that we'll decide whether we see more increases or a stabilization of interest rates, or whether we see decreases. I expect, and the bank does too, that we're going to see 3% inflation for some time to come. And despite we seeing essentially no economic growth, the labor market is relatively strong, with wages being relatively strong vis-a-vis inflation. And so I think certainly over the course of the fall, we're not likely to see any rate decreases. And if inflation remains high, particularly in some of the core measures, we may well be in for another rate increase in October or in December, which are the next two decision dates.
So if there's no growth, or if the economy starts to contract, do our minds now shift once again to concerns about a recession, David?
We're on the razor's edge here. We aren't seeing growth, but we aren't seeing big declines in real GDP. This is the situation we've been in since February. We are just skating along. So the danger, of course, is that it doesn't take a lot to push us into negative territory if we don't have a lot of strong underlying growth. Residential construction was an important contributor to economic growth in Canada for a long time, and that has been substantially eroded. So the spending on new residential construction now is not quite at the level that we saw in the first month of the pandemic, but pretty close. And so I expect over the course of the fall, that will continue to decline as people just can't afford those new houses because their mortgage payments would be too big.
David Macdonald reacting to our breaking news this hour. The key interest rate holds steady here. The Bank of Canada just announcing it will remain at 5%. David, thank you for that.